Laura Lane Welch Bush is the wife of the 43rd President, George W. Bush. She served as First Lady from 2001 to 2009, advocating for historic education reform and the well-being of women and families worldwide. During her 8 years in the White House, Mrs. Laura Bush was a champion of President Bush's ambitious agenda and a gracious representative of the American people. A former teacher and librarian, she has dedicated herself to advancing education and promoting the well-being of women and families worldwide. Mrs. Bush was a key advocate of the President's historic education reform, the No Child Left Behind Act, and a staunch supporter of NCLB's Reading First program, which is the largest early reading initiative in American history. Early in the President's first term, she launched Ready to Read, Ready to Learn, an education initiative that promoted best practices in early childhood education and raised awareness of innovative teacher training programs. Inspired by her success with the Texas Book Festival, Mrs. Bush founded the National Book Festival to introduce tens of thousands of Americans to their favorite authors each year. In 2003, Mrs. Bush answered the call to take her education agenda global, as honorary ambassador for the United Nations Literacy Decade. In this role, she has worked with the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization to promote global literacy programs with measurable outcomes. She convened world leaders for annual summits that inspired successful practices, beginning with the first ever White House Conference on Global Literacy in 2006. Mrs. Bush has visited schools and met with students in nations from Afghanistan to Zambia, with a particular focus on encouraging girls and women to pursue their education. As the leader of President Bush's Helping America's Youth Initiative, Mrs. Bush oversaw 10 federal agencies in a groundbreaking partnership that realized the vision of the President Bush's management agenda. Through a national conference in Washington and 6 regional conferences, Helping America's Youth taught more than 1,000 community members new strategies to address the needs of at-risk youth. Since the attacks of September 11, Mrs. Bush has been an outspoken supporter of the women of Afghanistan. In November 2001, she became the First Lady to give the President's weekly radio address, speaking out against the Taliban's oppression of women and children. She has traveled to Afghanistan 3 times and served as honorary chair of the U.S. Afghan Women's Council. Mrs. Bush has been a leading advocate for the cause of human rights in Burma. She drew global attention to the ruling junta's oppression with a 2006 roundtable at the Union headquarters. After Cyclone Nargis devastated Burma in May 2008, Mrs. Bush held an unprecedented press conference in the White House press briefing room and urged the regime to accept international aid. Mrs. Bush also traveled to the Thai-Burma border and met with refugees who fled the abuses of Burma's military regime. Mrs. Bush has traveled to all 50 states and more than 75 countries. She has made 5 trips to Africa alone in support of President Bush's life-saving global health initiatives, including the President's Malaria Initiative, PMI, and the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR. In visits to 10 of the 15 countries targeted by the PMI and 12 of the 15 PEPFAR countries in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, she witnessed firsthand the success of these historic commitments. In 2006, she joined President Bush to co-host the first ever White House Summit on Malaria, which helped raise awareness of malaria and support grassroots efforts to eradicate the disease. Mrs. Bush has helped thousands of women take charge of their health by raising awareness of breast cancer and heart disease. As ambassador for the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute's Heart Truth campaign, Mrs. Bush traveled the country to educate women about the symptoms of heart disease, which is the #1 killer of American women. In addition, Mrs. Bush helped launch the U.S. Middle East Partnership for Breast Cancer Awareness and Research and the Partnership for Breast Cancer Awareness and Research of the Americas, which unite the resources of researchers and advocates in the United States and around the world. Mrs. Laura Bush was born on November 4, 1946, in Midland, Texas. She earned degrees in education and library science and worked for several years as an elementary school teacher and children's librarian before marrying George Walker Bush. They have twin daughters, Jenna and Barbara, and a son-in-law, Henry Hager. The Bush family also includes 2 dogs, Barney and Miss Beasley. Prior to becoming First Lady of the United States, Mrs. Bush served as the First Lady of Texas. Laura Welch was the only child of Harold Welch, a home builder, and Jenna Hawkins Welch. Her parents placed a high priority on her education and fostered her interest in reading. She attended public schools in Midland, Texas, where in 1963 she was involved in an automobile accident that killed the driver of another car. The police report stated that Welch had run a stop sign, but no charges were filed. After graduating from high school in 1964, she earned a bachelor's degree in elementary education from Southern Methodist University in 1968. She later taught in public schools in Dallas and Houston. She received a master's degree in library science from the University of Texas in 1973 and later worked as a librarian in Austin. Following her marriage to George W. Bush on November 5, 1977, Laura Bush devoted her time to volunteer work and homemaking. Twin daughters, Barbara and Jenna, were born in 1981. After George Bush was elected governor of Texas in 1994, Laura Bush raised her profile, working to improve literacy and raising funds for public libraries. Notably, she sought to raise statewide literacy in collaboration with her mother-in-law, Barbara Bush, and the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. Laura Bush initiated the Texas Book Festival, which raised nearly $900,000 for Texas public libraries during its first 4 years. She also promoted breast cancer awareness and women's health issues. In 1999, George Bush announced his candidacy for the Republican Party presidential nomination. Although Laura Bush initially resisted giving public campaign speeches, she became an avid campaigner, even addressing the Republican National Convention in July 2000. When she was asked whether she would emulate the activist First Lady model of Hillary Rodham Clinton or the more traditional model of her mother-in-law, Bush demurred, implying that she would define the role for herself. Shortly before entering the White House, she admitted in a televised interview that she opposed overturning Roe v. Wade, although her husband had advocated overturning it. As First Lady, Bush traveled solo to Europe, spoke on radio, in the president's place, in support of the Afghan people, and agreed to testify before a Senate Committee on Education. In a more traditional vein, she also organized a national book fair featuring American authors, started the Laura Bush Foundation to raise funds for libraries, and won praise for her efforts to comfort victims of the September 11 attacks of 2001. She garnered some criticism in February 2003 when she canceled a poetry event at the White House after she learned that some of the invitees planned to make public their opposition to the forthcoming war against Iraq. Overall, however, her popularity remained high. As an honorary ambassador for the United Nations Decade of Literacy, Bush hosted the Conference on Global Literacy in September 2006. In December 2008 she received the Freedom Award from the relief organization Christian Freedom International. Bush later wrote an autobiography, Spoken from the Heart, 2010, in which she defended her husband and for the first time publicly discussed the 1963 car accident. Born in Midland, Texas, Bush graduated from Southern Methodist University in 1968 with a bachelor's degree in education, and took a job as a second-grade teacher. After attaining her master's degree in library science at the University of Texas at Austin, she was employed as a librarian. Bush met her future husband, George W. Bush, in 1977, and they were married later that year. The couple had twin daughters in 1981. Bush's political involvement began during her marriage. She campaigned with her husband during his unsuccessful 1978 run for the United States Congress, and later for his successful Texas gubernatorial campaign. As First Lady of Texas, Bush implemented many initiatives focused on health, education, and literacy. In 1999 to 2000, she aided her husband in campaigning for the presidency in a number of ways, such as delivering a keynote address at the 2000 Republican National Convention, which gained her national attention. She became First Lady after her husband was inaugurated as president on January 20, 2001. Polled by the Gallup organization as one of the most popular First Ladies, Bush was involved in national and global concerns during her tenure. She continued to advance her trademark interests of education and literacy by establishing the annual National Book Festival in 2001. She encouraged education on a worldwide scale. She also advanced women's causes through the Heart Truth and Susan G. Komen for the Cure organizations. She represented the United States during her foreign trips, which tended to focus on HIV/AIDS and malaria awareness. She is the oldest living former First Lady, following the death of Rosalind Carter in 2023. Laura Lane Welch was born on November 4, 1946, at Midland Memorial Hospital in Midland, Texas, the only child of Harold Bruce Welch and Jenna Louise, née Hawkins, Welch. She is of English, French, and Swiss ancestry. Her father was a house builder and later successful real estate developer, while her mother worked as the bookkeeper for her father's business. Early on, her parents encouraged her to read, leading to what would become her love of reading. She said, "I learned how important reading is at home from my mother. When I was a little girl, my mother would read stories to me. I have loved books and going to the library ever since. In the summer, I liked to spend afternoons reading in the library. I enjoyed The Little House on the Prairie and Little Women books, and many others. Reading gives you enjoyment throughout your life." Bush has also credited her second-grade teacher, Charlene Nagy, for inspiring her interest in education. On the night of November 6, 1963, 2 days after her 17th birthday, Laura Bush ran a stop sign and struck another car, killing its driver. The victim was her close friend and classmate Michael Dutton Douglas. By some accounts, Douglas had been Bush's boyfriend at one time, but she stated that he was not her boyfriend at that time but rather a very close friend. Bush and her passenger, both 17, were treated for minor injuries. According to the accident report released by the City of Midland in 2000, in response to an open records request, she was not charged in the incident. In 2000, Laura Bush's spokesman said, "It was a very tragic accident that deeply affected the families and was very painful for all involved, including the community at large." In her book Spoken from the Heart, she said that the crash caused her to lose her faith for many, many years. She attended James Bowie Elementary School, San Jacinto Junior High School, and Robert E. Lee High School in Midland. She graduated from Lee in 1964 and went on to attend Southern Methodist University in Dallas, where she was a member of Kappa Alpha Theta. She graduated in 1968 with a Bachelor of Science degree in education. After graduating from SMU, she began her career as a school teacher at Longfellow Elementary School in the Dallas Independent School District. She then taught for 3 years at John F. Kennedy Elementary School, a Houston Independent School District school in Houston, until 1972. In 1973, Bush attained a Master of Science degree in Library Science from the University of Texas at Austin. She was soon employed as a librarian at the Kashmir Gardens branch at the Houston Public Library. The following year, she moved back to Austin and took another job as a librarian in the Austin Independent School District School Dawson Elementary until 1977. She reflected on her employment experiences to a group of children in 2003, saying, "I worked as a teacher and librarian and I learned how important reading is in school and in life." Bush met her husband in July 1977 when mutual friends Joe and Jen O'Neill invited them to a backyard barbecue at their home. He proposed to her at the end of September and they were married on November 5 of that year, the day after her 31st birthday, at the First United Methodist Church in Midland, the same church in which she had been baptized. The couple honeymooned in Cozumel, Mexico. George W. Bush detailed his choice to marry Laura as the best decision of his life. Laura, an only child, said she gained brothers and sisters and wonderful in-laws who all accepted her after she wed George W. Bush. The year after their marriage, the couple began campaigning for George W. Bush's 1978 congressional candidacy. According to George Bush, when he asked her to marry him, she had said, "Yes. But only if you promise me that I'll never have to make a campaign speech." She soon relented and gave her first stump speech for him in 1978 on the courthouse steps in Muleshoe, Texas. After narrowly winning the primary, he lost the general election. Bush attended the inauguration of her father-in-law George H. W. Bush as Ronald Reagan's vice president in January 1981, after Reagan won the 1980 United States presidential election. She credited her father-in-law's election to the vice presidency with giving her and her husband national exposure. The Bushes had tried to conceive for 3 years, but pregnancy did not happen easily. On November 25, 1981, Laura Bush gave birth to fraternal twin daughters, Barbara and Jenna. The twins were born 5 weeks early by an emergency cesarean section in Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas, Texas, as Laura had developed life-threatening preeclampsia, toxemia. George W. Bush credited his wife with his decision to stop drinking in 1986. She reflected that she thought her husband was drinking too much amid her knowing it was not his desired way of living. Approaching him, she related that her father had been alcoholic and it was not a pattern she wished to repeat in their family. She is also credited with having a stabilizing effect on his private life. According to People magazine reporter Jane Sims Podesta, she is the steel in his back. She is a civilizing influence on him. I think she built him, in many ways, into the person he is today. Bush traveled to Kuwait in April 1993, accompanying her in-laws as well as brothers-in-law Jeb and Marvin Bush after former President Bush was invited to return to the Middle East for the first time since his presidency. Several times a year, Bush and her husband traveled to their sprawling family estate, the Bush compound, better known as Walker's Point. Located in Kennebunkport, Maine, the compound is where Bush family gatherings have been held for nearly 100 years. First Lady of Texas. Bush became the First Lady of Texas when her husband was elected as the Governor of Texas and served as First Lady of that state from January 17, 1995, to December 21, 2000. When asked about her interest in politics, she responded, "It doesn't drive me." Though during her years in the governor's mansion, she did not hold a single formal event, Laura worked for women's and children's causes including health, education, and literacy. She implemented 4 major initiatives: Take Time for Kids, an awareness campaign to educate parents and caregivers on parenting, family literacy. Through cooperation with the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, she urged Texas communities to establish family literacy programs, Reach Out and Read, a pediatric reading program, and Ready to Read, an early childhood educational program. She raised money for public libraries through her establishment of the Texas Book Festival, in 1995. She established the First Lady's Family Literacy Initiative, which encouraged families to read together. Bush further established Rainbow Rooms across the state, in an effort to provide emergency services for neglected or abused children. Through this, she promoted the Adopt a Caseworker program to provide support for child protective services. She used her position to advocate Alzheimer's disease and breast cancer awareness as well. Her husband announced his campaign for President of the United States in mid-1999, something that she agreed to. She did say, however, that she had never dreamed that he would run for office. The Bush campaign worked to assure voters that as First Lady, she would not seek to emulate then First Lady Hillary Clinton, who had faced controversy for leading several policy initiatives from within the White House despite being unelected. When asked who she would be like out of the past First Ladies, she insisted it would be herself. In July, she delivered a keynote address to the delegates at the 2000 Republican National Convention, which put her on the national stage. In December 2000, her husband resigned as governor of Texas to prepare for his inauguration as President of the United States in January 2001. As First Lady, Bush was involved in issues of concern to children and women, both nationally and internationally. Her major initiatives included education and women's health. Thank you for watching this video.